So we're going to get started. My name is Mark Dunley, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the EcoAction Committee of the Green Party of the United States. And we hold monthly forums on the second Monday of each month. And this week's forum or month's forum is about the eco-socialist Green New Deal, which the Green Party first began promoting in 2010. And we're going to talk about how to push the Green New Deal in the current political climate. Presenters will include Howie Hawkins, Nina Schlegel, and Anthony Karefa Rogers-Wright. We'll have each of them present for 10 minutes. This is being recorded, by the way, and we'll play it on our YouTube channel. And after each of them make a presentation, then we'll open it up for questions and answers. We ask you to put your questions in the chat. So the original, well,
Hey, Mark, can I ask you a quick question? I'm so sorry to cut you off. Is it possible to end that noise as it keeps happening, as people keep coming on? Because I have headphones on and it kind of hurts my ears.
okay, if any of the co-hosts can figure out how to make that occur, that'd be good. That should be over pretty quickly. But the Green New Deal, the Green Party in 2010 was when the United States, we first promoted in the United States, and it was actually Howie Hawkins, who was a Green Party candidate for governor in New York State. But we had built it from what the European Greens had done back in 2007. And the European Greens initiative was a combination of climate action plus a need to respond to the financial meltdown caused by the United States housing mortgages that spread worldwide. I also mentioned the Center for Biological Diversity also promoted a Green New Deal about the same time. Um, the original eco-socialist Green New Deal combined a 10-year transition to zero emissions with a strong economic bill of rights, which guaranteed universal living wage jobs, single-payer health care, affordable housing, and free college. It expressly called for a halt of fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure, a rapid response phase out of nuclear power, and cutting the military budget by at least 50% to help fund the transition. Along with the carbon tax, it also supported public power and higher taxes on the wealthy. Unfortunately, climate change and global warming has continued to get worse since 2010, and the world is both rapidly running out of time to keep global warming at manageable levels, with us rushing quickly to break various tipping points. The Green New Deal has gone through some up and downs. Certainly, AOC and Sunrise brought a lot of attention to in 2018 when they sat in Speaker's Pelosi office, though their proposals, especially when Senator Markey got involved, was significantly weaker and slower, looking more of a 2050 rather than a 10-year timeline. There was a lot of speculation that the Green New Deal globally would become a focal point, lead to recovery from the COVID economic downturn, but that fizzled out. Republicans have continued to attack the Green New Deal, and many Democrats, unfortunately, now shy away from it politically. However, at the activist level, there continues to be support, though often there's more limited proposals such as green schools or green public housing, or decarbonization efforts such as Local Law 97 in New York City, which targets large buildings. There have been municipal Green New Deal efforts in places like Boston and Ithaca, one of the reasons we asked Nina to join us. There's also been public power campaigns, such as in New York, where the state is supposed to be building public renewable. Um, so we're going to have three presenters: Howie Hawkins, Nina Schlegel, who's been involved with the Boston Green New Deal, and also Anthony Karefa Rogers-Wright, who environmental justice, climate activists, international solidarity. I will now go work on the beeping noise. Um, so our first presenter will be Howie Hawkins, and he is the former um, Green Party presidential candidate in 2000 and what was that? 2020. Um, and he was launched the Green New Deal during his 2000 campaign for governor in New York. He's retired Teamster, living in Syracuse, New York. He's been active in movements of civil rights, peace, labor, and the environmental since the late 1960s. He's co-founder of the anti-nuclear Clamshell Alliance in 1976, co-founder of the Green Party movement in the United States in 1984. He's a member of the Green Party, the socialist organization Solidarity, and a Ukraine Solidarity Network with whom he's been working with climate campaigners in Ukraine to reconstruct Ukraine with renewable energy. Howie Hawkins. And you got to come off mute, Howie.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, in 2010, we ran on a Green New Deal in New York. And the program was basically to get 100% clean energy and zero greenhouse gas emissions in 10 years. It was an emergency program, and it was based on a planned rapid transition based on public ownership and planning in the energy, transportation, financial, and key manufacturing industries. And it combined with an economic bill of rights, a right to a living wage job, providing public goods and services for those who couldn't find good jobs in the private sector, a guaranteed minimum income above poverty, health care for all through a single payer public system, tuition-free public education from child care through college, and affordable housing through public housing expansion to cover the shortage of affordable housing in the private housing market. And we advanced this program at that time to deal with the twin crises we were facing. Of course, the climate emergency, but also the economic recession coming out of the 2008 financial crisis. And we're in a similar situation now. This stupid war in Iran's going to plunge the world into a depression. So we're going to need an economic recovery as well as a program to deal with climate change going forward. And this statement, I mean, our campaign in New York caught on with Greens around the country. So by August, we had a statement signed by nearly 100 Green candidates from around the country with a federal policy orientation. So while we couldn't talk about cutting the military budget in New York, which doesn't have a military budget, we could talk about it for the federal government to help pay for a Green New Deal. And this became the signature issue for the Green Party in the 2010s. It was this, Jill Stein's slogan in her 2012 and 2016 programs was a Green New Deal for America. Many other candidates ran on it. I ran on it again in 2014 and 2018 for governor in New York. And then in 2018, it went viral, so to speak, because it was picked up by progressive Democrats like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but they watered down the Green New Deal radically. They extended the timeline for zero emissions by 20 years at that time, from 2030 to 2050. They changed the goal from real zero to net zero, leaving the door open for the fantasy of carbon capture and sequestration while we continued to burn fossil fuels. They dropped our demand for no fracking and no new fossil fuel infrastructure, which once it's built is going to be used for decades. They dropped the phase out of nuclear power. They dropped the deep cuts in military spending. And they replaced our public sector program, which has concrete goals and timetables, with the neoliberal incentive program with uncertain outcomes based on tax breaks and subsidies for consumers and businesses. So they put this into a non-binding resolution for Congress, and the Democratic leadership, Nancy Pelosi, the speaker, never let it get to a vote in the House. On the Senate side, the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, said, yeah, they've been denigrating the Green New Deal. Let's get those Democrats on the record. And the Democrats senators, to the last one of them, voted against it, including Ed Markey, who was a co-sponsor. They said it was a dirty trick by the Republicans to make them go on record. They couldn't even back their own program. But with this watered down Green New Deal version out there, when I ran for the Green nomination for president in 2020, I started calling it an eco-socialist Green New Deal to distinguish it from the neoliberal watered down version that the Democrats are putting forward. And if you remember that election, Biden and Harris said they didn't support a Green New Deal. They said it point blank. In fact, the only candidate that really had a half decent Green New Deal program was Bernie Sanders, but all the other Democrats lined up against him in the South Carolina primary, and Sanders was done. And so during the Biden administration, they did put forward, as Mark mentioned, a couple partial Green New Deal bills, the Green New Deal for public schools, the Green New Deal for public housing. But those bills were limited to improving existing public schools and existing public housing. It was improvements of the buildings, uh, including energy efficiency and renewable retrofits. But what we'd been talking about when we talked about schools and housing was free public education in the public schools from preschool to college and expanding public housing uh, to the point where everyone has access to affordable housing. So it was still quite watered down. And of course, even with Democratic majorities in both houses of Congress in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, those bills went nowhere. So the progressive Democrats, the best of them, settled for supporting Biden's neoliberal program, which was the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a big cutback from what he'd been talking about in the Build Back Better proposals, which were public spending for climate and care programs. At least there was public spending. Now it's just tax incentives and tax breaks. We're at the point now where you don't even hear the progressive Democrats talking much about a Green New Deal or really any kind of climate action under Trump.
3 minutes, Howie.
Okay, well, I got about 15 minutes here, so I'm just going to add one more point. And, this Green New Deal, we have to think of it as a global program. Now, deep cuts in military spending can help pay for climate and ecological debt that the United States owes to the world for being the world's largest historical carbon emitter and destroyer of carbon storing forests, wetlands, and soils. And we are linked to this in the United States, to this destruction of biodiversity and that helps keep the climate stable by the corporate globalization of supply chains and trade. So we have ecologically unequal exchange that exploits the labor, rainforests, agricultural lands, and fisheries of the global south to provide us with wood and palm oil and other food and fiber products to the rich countries. So paying for this climate and ecological debt would not only be reparations to the global south to help those countries make the transition to sustainable clean energy economies, paying for this debt is also an investment in the habitability of the planet for everyone, including us. And what we should be doing instead of wreaking havoc on human beings and the environment through military actions like this insane war in Iran, we should be, that's the 10th country Trump has bombed this year or sent military forces into. We should be doing a Green New Deal to help the world make this transition to clean energy and in that way make friends around the world and build peace.
Okay. Thank you, Howie. You actually finished a little bit early, but that's really good. Um, Let me get Nina up. Oops, take me a second here. Add pen. There she is. And where did Nina's bio disappear to? Well, I know Nina. Oh, here she is. So Nina Schlegel is a climate justice advocate, researcher, and founder of the Global Center for Climate Justice and the Green New Deal Resource Hub. She is the author of the 2018 Climate Justice Boston Report for Boston City Council and created the Green New Deal and Just Recovery Plan for the City of Albany. Her research expertise includes Green New Deal policy, the connection between democracy and climate justice, and urban climate justice. I will also mention that every year EcoAction does Earth Day to May Day and trying to make the connections between things like the Green New Deal and immigrant rights and workers' rights. And so one of the reasons we wanted to do this a little bit ahead of a time was to give people ideas about things they could do in their local community to promote a Green New Deal. And that's particularly why we're so happy to have Nina joining us.
All right. Thanks, Mark, Maureen, Howie, everyone, for having me as part of this discussion. I do have some slides, but Mark assured me that they're also actually going to be shared out with everyone. So don't worry about that. And it's really good to see you again, Anthony. He's actually an advisor at our center as well. I'm here tonight in my personal capacity as someone who cares about the future of this planet and all life on it. I'm Nina Schlegel. I'm the director of the Global Center for Climate Justice. And previously to that work, I wrote the Green New Deal and Just Recovery campaign for Michelle Wu when she successfully ran for mayor of Boston, and have since been a leadership member of the Boston Green New Deal Coalition, which is a coalition of about 40 different grassroots and grasstops organizations pushing for the implementation of community-driven priorities within the city of Boston. At our Global Center for Climate Justice, what we noticed after creating this Green New Deal for the city of Boston was that people started coming out of the woodwork in other cities around the country and then even around the world. And so in response to that, we created a Green New Deal resource hub, and I can put the link in the chat as well. It's gndcities.org, basically. But to highlight the incredible work taking place around the US and internationally, and to support the work of cities and coalitions to highlight models for advancing a more transformative Green New Deal. And so through that work at the center and my personal activism, we've been pushing for a Green New Deal politics that is more radical, that is taking on this mantle, an inspiration from the Green Party, but also from the national level, and identifying what that would mean at the level of the city. And this is particularly important now, even though even I am not hearing about it. I agree with you, Mark. Under Trumpism and with the rollback in billions in federal funding. And so the work at the local level is more important than ever because the Green New Deal offers a pathway for pursuing more transformative, more root cause initiatives, root cause-based initiatives. And this pathway needs to address the social, the environmental, the economic, and the climate injustices that play out, in particular, at the level of our cities. And in that respect, it must be highly intersectional. And it's honestly, it's a challenge and an opportunity to put forth a visionary left politics that can excite and motivate people to become part of an effort to make it less about fear of the future and the uncertainty of the future, particularly as it looks right now, and more about the excitement of what it is possible for us to create. And so at the center, some of the things we have been doing is sharing concrete models of what that looks like in our city, but in other cities around the country too. And Mark and Howie have both been talking about this a little bit, but we want to explicitly recognize and mention that there are some visions of a Green New Deal that are overly reformist. Just calling something a Green New Deal doesn't make it transformative. Like any term, we have seen it co-opted, and I think, Green New Deal and those ideas can sit along a continuum of everything from greenwash capitalism to ecosocialism. And so some of our work has been pushing towards more of those transformative options at one end of the spectrum. And in our work over the last couple of years, what we have found is there are some guiding principles that have helped for advancing a more transformative local Green New Deal that we can see as building blocks for the movement, and also to dispel the notion that it's not possible, that it's too big, that it's not fundable. So I'm going to share some of those with you now, and we can talk about Boston Green New Deal politics as well if you guys want. But I'm going to share 7 principles that have come out of our work. The first is that the Green New Deal should be participatory and proactive. And that means it's not just about the distribution of new services and new funding or efforts to stop climate harms, But the Green New Deal should also create new pathways for democratic governance and engagement of the people. And so there are a number of different examples. I know I'm going to go through these really fast, but two that I'll highlight are participatory budgeting, which takes place in many cities, including in Boston, started in the city of Porto Alegre in Brazil. They now control a huge swath of the city's annual budget through participatory budgeting. Another example is Seattle's Green New Deal Oversight Board, which was a board created at the behest of community activists and now helps decide where millions of dollars is going annually, and is made up of youth and labor, indigenous communities, and other community representatives. The second principle is that it should seek to address the root causes of the crisis, of our multi-crisis. And in this case, from a city level perspective, that means addressing the financing and operations of a fossil fuel economy. So a couple of examples within that would be to disassociate from risky climate businesses through divestment, through the ending of contracts with fossil fuel corporations and others, and to demand that these corporations internalize some of their health and climate externalities through things like the new climate super funds that we're seeing being passed in states across the country. The third principle is that it should seek to advance climate, economic, and racial justice as well. So not only just through the city's programs and initiatives, what it puts out into the city, but also in an internal sense through a process of self-examination. And I think the city of Madison is probably doing this best of all, and by examining on a 3 times yearly basis the type of equity that they are advancing. So they have to review all of their new policies, all of their new hires, and see whether or not they are advancing their equity goals. And fourth, it should embrace an intersectionality of issues and a just transition. If you have policy solutions, particularly in the urban scale, that address only one inequity while ignoring the interplay of injustices at the urban scale, then the solution is going to be incomplete at best and possibly harmful at worst. And that applies to anything that is done within a city. So from developing housing without a transportation and open space plan, or without a plan for services to complement. And there are entire neighborhoods that I can point to where that has happened. Similarly, there are great just transition examples out there, which is an example of intersectionality from places like British Columbia, where the Canadian government has helped with startup funding for an Indigenous-owned geothermal plant that now provides power to over 10,000 homes. But we need a just transition for other sectors too, beyond energy. So the building sector, the transportation sector. For a while, the city of Los Angeles had a really amazing program where they worked with the local United Steelworkers Union, city departments, community-based organizations to hire from disadvantaged communities in the building of the city's electric public bus fleet. The fifth principle is that it should enable and expand social ownership and control of resources. So this is something that y'all have already been talking about. And that could also exist on a spectrum, right? From government ownership to cooperative ownership to worker ownership. There are many, many examples of cities moving in this direction. So from cooperative housing in the city of Zurich, which is where my family is from. And the city of Zurich is well on their way. They have a goal of making a third of the city's housing cooperative by 2030 to make sure that it is affordable for the people who live in the city. And they're actually well on their way to doing that. They provide municipal land for the construction of cooperatives, loans, technical support, and legal advice for anyone who wants to start a housing cooperative. On the other side of the spectrum, worker-owned cooperatives, we see in New York City that telecoms workers got together to create their own worker-owned ISP, or internet service provider, after the egregious pricing and practices of Spectrum. And so there's many different ways in which the city can advance these types of social ownership. The sixth principle is taking local action, but with an international lens, because as was mentioned before, necessarily all of these concerns have a global element to them. And so what that can look like is taking inspiration from some of the more radical Green New Deal platforms, whether it be the People's Green New Deal, the Red New Deal, the Red, Black, and Green New Deal, and others as well, and applying that kind of vision to the level of the city. And making sure that we can find what that might look like at the level of the city. So a couple of examples of that would be right to repair programs, like in Hamburg, Germany, where they have invested municipal money. They hire 70 workers as their full-time jobs, and they repair objects brought in by residents, and it's almost 500,000 objects annually. Other examples of this look like the city of Minneapolis, which is working with local indigenous nations to sell back some of the city-owned land to the indigenous nation, or in Victoria in BC, where they have urban gardening programs to help address some of the food insecurity. So what often happens when I talk about these like Green New Deal initiatives across the country and around the world is that someone in the audience, whether it be media or policy folks, or even sometimes activists, the response is, we can't afford these things. But that I think is a lie, and it's one of the big lies, maybe, using a term from Donald Trump, because money is a tool, and specifically it is a tool of governments. And so that also assumes that there is a viable alternative that we have. And I would argue that we do not, that in fact, transformation is not just needed, but it is necessary. And it's also economically prudent that we get started now. If you want to be a hard-nosed economist about it, there's the time value of money. These things are going to become more expensive to do. And so one of the things that I think helps in contextualizing how do we pay for this all, and I'll get to some examples around it all too, is that all of these systems, when we look around us, these institutions, these policies, they were all designed by previous generations. And so, of course, we can edit them and we can transform them, but it is uncomfortable, and it's going to take people who are able and excited and interested in sitting within that discomfort. And funding is one of those things, those tools that we can create. So that brings me to principle 7, which is we can pay for it, and cities have been paying for it, particularly within this like national context that we have right now. And so, I mean, honestly, the sky's the limit in terms of how creative you want to get with climate financing, from green banks to public banks, to climate bonding, which is municipal or state bonding, so raising debt for large-scale projects, which can be hard to do through other mechanisms, to progressive taxes like the city of Portland has on their larger corporations within the city. Think Walmart and Target. So they have a 1% sales tax that has raised more than their wildest dreams in terms of revenue. It's raised over $1 billion in 5 years for local investments. That's workforce training, that's decarbonization, and other programs as well. The city of Vancouver has a housing crisis, and so they created an empty homes tax on all units that sit empty for more than 6 months out of the year. That raises hundreds of millions a year. So there's many different ways to create and pay for what we need to do.
So Nina,
and so you have
finished at this point?
Yes, yeah, it's the last slide, yeah. So there's 7 principles. There's probably more principles out there too, but this last slide has, I think, a couple of thoughts on Green New Deal that we should consider today. So like in 2026 and beyond, in expanding our timeframes and timelines and thinking about how we create the foundations now for what we want to build over the next 10, 20, 30 years. We need to think more outside of our own boxes in terms of what's already been possible in our city or in our state, and look beyond, even internationally, and think at a multi-scalar level, because there's a lot that states constrain when it comes to what a city can do. So working towards state enabling legislation and countering the new frontiers of extraction, including artificial intelligence, data centers, and charter cities, and any bad state legislation. So that was a lot. Thank you for listening all. Happy to share the notes and some of the links to our resources.
Well, thank you very much, Nina. I will note the City of Albany is in the process of updating its climate action plan. And City of Albany, New York, we're trying to get them to do a Green New Deal, so your resources will be quite helpful. And the Sustainability Director for the City of Albany is Jason West, who used to be the Green Party mayor of New Paltz, who was known for doing same-sex marriage, but now he's working on that. So Anthony, if you could turn on your video so I can pin you. But Anthony is our next speaker.
I'm in a cab because my plane landed very late, but thanks to the power of hotspots, it looks like I'll be able to pull this off, but you won't be able to see my face.
Okay. Well, Anthony Karefa Rogers-Wright is the son of Sierra Leone, an international climate and environmental liberation advocate, a racial justice practitioner, a writer and policy expert residing in the United States with his family and their Mississippi cats, Evil Ernie and Malachi the Mississippi, proud and active member of the Black Alliance of Peace and the North-South Project for People-Centered Human Rights, and his radio program, Full Spectrum with Anthony Rogers-Wright, here's on the mighty WPFF network every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it seems like you have your slideshow able to go.
Yes, I am ready to go. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much, Nina and Howie. Always good to see you, Howie. Last time I saw Howie was at the Socialism Conference in Chicago when we were kind of talking about what I'm going to talk to you about briefly. Everything Howie said, everything Nina said, it's time to reclaim eco-socialism unapologetically for many of the reasons that you've just heard, and I'll go into it a bit more with this slide deck. So first and foremost, when we're talking about eco-socialism, as Nina and Howie, I think, lifted up, simply put, it's a socialist political and economic system that prioritizes ecological and social needs over profit. And that is very, very important because this idea that we can have unlimited growth has nothing to do with the original Green New Deal and the tenets of eco-socialism. Howie was correct to bring up the Inflation Reduction Act, which many of us in more radical Black and brown and indigenous environmental and climate justice spaces refer to as a poison pill more than a historic bill because there were still externalities, right? A historic climate bill does not open up 600 million acres of the Gulf of Mexico, not Gulf of America, the Gulf of Mexico, to more oil and gas drilling. And as Howie said, also would not heavily fund what some refer to as false solutions like so-called carbon capture and sequestration. Kate Arnoff wrote an incredible article for the New Republic in the fossil fuel industry excited about the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's because they are making billions of dollars off of it today. That's like one of the few elements of the Inflation Reduction Act that still stand. This expansion of IRS tax code 45Q, which will essentially pay the fossil fuel cartels to continue using these false solutions. So that said, just three quotes that I think are extremely important because the, if you will, neoliberal or social democrat version of the Green New Deal that Howie named doesn't really talk too much about agriculture. And this is a big deal, right? Despite all our accomplishments, we owe our existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains. That's the great Paul Harvey. He has a great book coming out really soon, actually, a new book. But the bottom line is if we do not change the way that we farm, some are saying that we have about 40 to 50 harvests left before things get very, very interesting. Furthermore, the neoliberal social democrat Green New Deal, no class analysis whatsoever, a little bit of sprinkling of environmental justice principles, but no deep class analysis. And this brings us to what Chico Mendes said, environmentalism without class struggle is just gardening. And then finally, this is one of my favorite quotes of all time, this idea that, we can just tinker around with capitalism and keep growing. Kenneth E. Boulding, excellent quote. Anyone who thinks we can have unlimited growth on a planet with limited resources is either a madman or an economist. And I think that's absolutely right to what Nina lifted up regarding AI and data centers, which I will get to shortly. So I'm not going to go through too much through this whole thing on capitalism. Mark has these slides; they're available to everyone. We know that the idea of Marx and eco-socialism comes from agriculture, the robbery of nature, this idea of a metabolic rift, which we find ourselves in now even more so. You could say that metabolic rift is even more pronounced in the advent of AI and data centers, water, emissions, and the fact that it's turning people into, even white people, into a surplus population. I've said that the advent of data centers, AI, and the recent removal of the endangerment findings by the Trump administration has garnished the wages of whiteness, in the words of Du Bois and our dear brother David Luther. And this surplus population also represents a metabolic rift. It's ironic that the biggest proponents right now of so-called universal basic income are the likes of Sam Altman and Elon Musk. And the reason for that is not benevolence. They understand that if all these jobs get taken, all of these resources get taken, the only way probably to prevent a violent uprising of the masses, the proletariat masses, is to kind of basically do a bigger version of what was done during the FDR New Deal, when labor groups took a bribe to essentially turn their backs on Black, Brown, Indigenous people, especially women, and allow the doors or the club of whiteness to be opened up to Italian people, to Ashkenazi Jewish people, and to Irish people. But that's here nor there. I'm going to move on here. I really do want to get to this idea of domestic colonialism, which is being more pronounced during the, more so, even under the Green New Deal, the neoliberal social democrat version of the Green New Deal. It's important to note that in addition to Rihanna Gunn Wright, who wrote that version of it, to Howie's point, it was also co-written by a brother named Ben Beachy, who was then working for the Blue Green Alliance, which is a conglomeration of big green groups like NRDC and Sierra Club, as well as big labor groups, who have been some of our biggest opponents to even a neoliberal version or a social democrat version of a Green New Deal, which is why the Green New Deal did not even include the words fossil fuel or the term fossil fuels once in that resolution that Howie named. Moving on, just want to get here. Here we see, the problems of not having an unapologetic eco-socialist approach to a Green New Deal. It still leads to over-extraction, as we are seeing now with data centers, AI, as Nina named. Toxic pollutants, this idea that we can just keep building renewables, but there are still scope 2 and scope 3 emissions associated with extracting critical minerals. And we know where those critical minerals are located in indigenous communities, whether they be indigenous to Africa, vis-a-vis Democratic Republic of the Congo, or right here in the United States, where most of the critical minerals are on people indigenous to Turtle Island in their territories. And then finally, there's always going to be tons of waste, tons of trash, plastics, all of the stuff that would be encapsulated in solar panels and batteries and whatnot. These things need to be thought about when we're thinking about any form of a Green New Deal. And if it's not an eco-socialist, an unapologetically eco-socialist approach, these things are going to continue. They may be much not as great as they are now, I should say, but there's still going to be externalities, and there are still going to be economic and energy sacrifice zones, as we see in places like the Gulf South vis-a-vis Cancer Alley. And this brings me to this idea of the Netherlands fallacy. We don't want to be like these social democrat countries like Norway, like Finland, like Denmark, and like the Netherlands, who Bernie Sanders mistakenly would refer to them as socialist countries, but these countries, of course, are built on extraction and externalization. The Netherlands fallacy that social democracies are quote unquote sustainable, yet they ignore the heavy burden that the global north or the core, that lifestyle, our lifestyle, places on the earth And finally, it assumes that environmental problems have been solved simply because these people aren't seeing them because they are in the core. They are totally ignoring the periphery. Everything Nina and Howie was saying, that it has to be a global Green New Deal. As a matter of fact, I'm heading down to Santa Marta, Colombia next month to talk about a fossil fuel treaty and getting off fossil fuels that will be led by the global south because they understand that there's just not much more to extract from anymore. How much time do I have, Mark?
I don't know, 2, 3 minutes.
Okay, let's move on to data centers then, because I think this is very important and very germane. The idea with data centers is that also being an eco-socialist Green New Deal, we have to go from just being not just being anti-war, we have to be imperialists as well. Everything how he named this feckless war of Zionist aggression in Iran, everything that we've seen in Palestine, Venezuela, and now the Revolutionary Republic of Cuba. But this also means graduating from climate and environmental justice to an idea of climate and environmental liberation. In the moment that we're in right now, justice is an idea of balance, but everything is so imbalanced right now. There cannot be climate or environmental justice without there first being liberation, which requires identifying the interlocking systems of oppression that cause the imbalance. Militarism is one of those, definitely one of those things that we're seeing now. And this means that we have to call upon ourselves to articulate the idea of ecocide more frequently in our communications and our outreach praxis. Climate and militarism nexus is something we've been working at the Black Alliance for Peace. I'll send Mark over our website on this. Please check it out because I'm running out of time. But now we're talking about this idea of data centers and AI. As we learned today, an AI error likely led to the school bombing that we saw in Iran. The settler and state wars, we call it a Black Alliance for Peace, building off of the violent theft of indigenous land, enslavement of Africans, and this idea of economic warfare. And then finally, the stages, the connections between AI data centers, profligate resource extraction and consumption, emissions, externalities, scarcity, and then, of course, the militarism aspects of it as well. This is all very, very bad for the planet. The data centers and AI equation, what we're seeing now is big tech, big oil, big labor, military industrial complex, liberals, the big greens, and the duopoly built up of Democrats and Republicans alike, all under the name of what I call bullshit abundance. That's the Ezra Klein variety. Ironically, he stole that from degrowth communists. And we're seeing that in policies named so-called permitting reform. But what they really are is deregulation to allow for unlimited growth. And what we can really equate this to is a Frankenstein monster of environmental racism, environmental entropy, and racial capitalism. I just want to end off, Mark, on highlighting what Howie said. There is no such thing as green capitalism, which is what happened to the Green Party's Green New Deal. The difference between the Stein-Hawkins Green Party version, it commodifies fake and climate solutions, as Howie named, extends the timeline for 0 to 2050. Energy sector still privatized, owned, and incentivized. Howie named also nuclear power, no changes to military spending, which is a big deal right now, as we just saw in the Trump White House, big military and big tech merging together to weaponize AI. In short, we need the economic democracy of an eco-socialist, real Green New Deal to plan and coordinate the complicated transition to 100% clean energy and zero emissions. This language comes from something that Howie and I worked on the last time that Joe ran, because we thought it was very important to reclaim the Green New Deal and showcase the differences. And then finally, I will basically end on the great Max Agile, who said the dangers of that neoliberal social democrat Green New Deal lies in identifying an anti-racist Green Keynesian tract as a quote-unquote transitional program, anti-capitalist or related to eco-socialism, but it's mislabeling, and this can confuse and has confused. Ask Howie, ask most of you who are in the Green Party. It has confused anti-capitalist politics by implying the anti-capitalist and anti-socialist movement has far more power than it does, or the electoral path to eco-socialism is feasible. I'll stop there, but degrowth is a good thing. I won't get too much into it, but looking forward to questions and discussion. And like I said, Mark has this slide deck, which I hope he shares with you. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Anthony. Like all our speakers, that was a lot of material in a very quick period of time. And if Nina, if you could also turn on your video so we can pin you here. I like Anthony, I do a radio show. Mine actually is daily. And today we interviewed Food and Water Watch, who just released a report. They're calling for a national moratorium on data centers. New York, we've introduced legislation for a 3-year moratorium on data centers. So if you have also on the question on degrowth, we did a webinar, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago on degrowth. So maybe when I send it out, I'll send around a link to that particular webinar. So people should put questions in. We'll probably take about 25 minutes for questions and answers. If you can put your questions into the chat. We're going to start off, I think this is mainly a question for Nina, but Mike Feinstein has a question about what was the most interesting labor ideas coming out of Seattle?
So you don't know that.
Well, yeah, I mean, Seattle is not my specific area of expertise, but I do know from speaking with some of the activists in Seattle that I can give you a little bit of their history in building up their Green New Deal, which involved labor, and that's the part that I do know without being a Seattle activist. And that is that a number of grassroots environmental organizations had been working for some time in trying to pass a Green New Deal in the city of Seattle. And they started to encounter resistance from local organizations, including some of the labor unions. And so instead of ignoring this fact, what the activists had shared with me was that they paused their campaign and took about a year or more to just be in conversation with with the labor unions and labor activists to work out what would be some areas of commonality. And then after that process, began to build a broader based coalition and campaign, which was ultimately more effective and brought about Green New Deal wins that benefited all of the parties that were part of that campaign, including the Green New Deal Oversight Board, which now has representation from labor. And so I think more than like specific labor wins, it was about the process that took place in Seattle, which I think is actually very instructive for other cities, including Boston, in that you can't rush that process, and it is about trust, and it is about understanding the common ground and the values, and how you then can build upon that common ground and that values when you are in relation with people. So that was the part I know. It sounds like Anthony might know a little bit about this too, actually. I see you, Anthony.
Oh no, it's been some time. I got priced out of Seattle long ago, my dear friend. So I'm happy that they have a new mayor who I think will embrace a lot of what you just named. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm not sure the makeup of the city council, Nina, but we know Shama is not on the city council anymore. So that's obviously too bad. But maybe she'll take out Adam Smith, and we'll have a true eco-socialist in the house for once.
And I do believe the new mayor of Seattle, a socialist, or semi-socialist, comes from Binghamton in New York State. Howie, you had something you want to add?
Yeah, let's not forget that the Battle of Seattle came out of Seattle, and it shut down the World Trade Center or World Trade Organization, and that labor had a lot to do with that. In fact, I think the roots of that come from the oil, chemical, and atomic workers and Tony Mazzocchi, who gave us what we now call the just transition. Back then, they called it a environmental superfund. The corporations had a superfund when the government had a superfund for corporations when they couldn't clean up their mess. And the oil, chemical, and atomic workers were saying, we're in dirty industries, and these jobs are killing us. And oil, chemicals, and nuclear power and weapons. So we want to get out of these industries, but we're not going to be ready to do that unless our income and benefits can be guaranteed over the transition. And so that became, they first called it a economic bill of rights for workers or a GI bill of rights for workers. But the whole idea of a transition, and they were way ahead of the environmental movement. This is in the early 1980s. Environmental movement was not speaking to workers about their, ability to maintain, a job and support their families with the environmental changes that were coming. And so it came from the labor movement. And I think that began to create the relationships, because some of the environmental groups picked up on that. That brought us together in Seattle, where we had the Battle of Seattle and shut down the World Trade Organization and put a big monkey wrench in the whole corporate globalization agenda.
Well,
But that was a while ago. I don't know what's come out of Seattle lately from the labor movement.
well, speaking of labor, that's been sometimes criticism of the Green New Deal, and that a lot of the unions feel that the jobs that are going to replace, positions at fossil fuel plants pay quite a bit less than what they're presently making. And I know a just transition is, obviously a key focal point, but how does one convince the unions that in fact this is in their interest to support the Green New Deal?
Well, the just transition is part of it. Legislation for pieces of the Green New Deal have to, and we've done this at least in proposals in New York in the state legislature, that jobs in the renewable energy sector, workers should be allowed to organize. They should be paid if they're getting government money, prevailing wage, and things like that that protect workers. I've debated this. I was in a panel that Sean Sweeney kind of pulled me into at the last minute for one of those, what do they call it, Trade Unions for Energy Democracy conferences, because they had a bunch of people from the Atomic Workers Union, Utility Workers 1 and 2, I think. And, I was talking to these guys who are union officers about the just transition. They were not opposed in principle. They were skeptical that the government could actually do it, because they were thinking of the NAFTA trade loss benefits. And they said those did not cover the cost to us, or us as workers. So that, the thing we got to do is convince those guys that a just transition program will actually deliver what we're saying. So it's got to be in the legislation. And the other thing you got to realize, you got to organize the rank and file, because the officers, they're trying to maintain and service their members, and they don't want to take risks because they're afraid that they won't get reelected. And they really don't want the members informed, because they might know enough to elect new leadership. So, you don't only have to go to the officers, you got to go to the rank and file and organize and educate.
Anthony, you want to say something?
I would just add on to what brother and comrade Howie just said about the rank and file. I mean, one of the more shocking elements of the meeting that the president just had in DC with all the big tech companies was that there were elements of big labor there. And they even took a shot, Mark, at the data center moratorium that Senator Sanders just introduced. So again, it's just like how he said, there are groups who work more with rank and file, like Labor Network for Sustainability. But, we learned some lessons with bitter tears on fighting big labor when it came to supply side and fossil fuel infrastructure. If we don't take seriously what Howie just named, we are going to have a rough time stopping these data centers, because big labor, they're horning for them right now, guys. It's just the bottom line. They are seeing short-term jobs and short-term profits and totally not paying attention to the long-term impacts in any way. And if we don't do what Howie said and a bunch more, we're going to be in a big fight with people who are well-funded, big labor bosses, as Howie said, who are connected to both political parties. Now, the Democrats can't just rely on the support of labor, as we saw with the Teamsters due to Biden breaking up the railroad workers strike, which unfortunately some Democratic socialists like Ocasio-Cortez voted for. And that cost him Sean O'Brien, who I met. That dude is a baller, by the way. That dude, he'll fight senators, he'll fight anyone. But this is a very, very serious issue, and we really have to work on our sort of rank and file organizing prowess, brother.
Well, we seem to have lost Anthony. I don't know, Nina, do you have any additions you wanted to add?
Anthony is muted, not lost.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. We just got to the hotel. My partner is very pregnant and very sick of traveling. So
I think also, to everything that Howie and Anthony said, is timely, is excellent. Just a couple of additional thoughts, and that is, these new forms of extraction and data centers, they're going to eliminate a lot of jobs. And so that is an opportunity to reach out to labor unions and to form solidarity, to educate the rank and file. And I think, a lot of this, at least from my personal experience, has really just been about reaching out to have conversations. I mean, that's why we go to the Boston Labor Conference every year. It's not about climate or about climate justice, but we are there to learn what labor is interested in and to see where we can find commonality. And also, thinking about how a Green New Deal can elevate universalist programs and principles that are going to benefit everyone, including whether someone is in a union or not in a union, wants to form a union, recently, moved away from you, whatever it might be. So I think there's also this emphasis on what are some of the universalist programs, whether it's education, services, childcare, housing, and so forth, that will benefit the folks who are and are not in unions.
So if people are interested in promoting a Green New Deal in their own community at this point, I mean, obviously Nina has made reference to a Green Resources Hub, Green New Deal Resources Hub, but what are some steps that people could be taking at this point to promote the Green New Deal locally?
Are they running as Democrats or as third party?
I'm just talking about activists in general. I mean, certainly running as a candidate is one thing, but I'm talking about your general climate activists.
I mean, I think first and foremost, take Green Party members, Green Party activists, take back your Green New Deal, take it back, like Jill attempted to do or did do when she ran this last time around. It's very, very important that people understand, people like Howie and David Schwab and others, Jean Mubaraka and Jill, who really deliberated on this. It was extracted from you as Green Party members. And thank goodness we had people like Nina who understood that and took it and made it into something that is workable and not just sort of like a bumper sticker, right? And not just a book to write and make some money off of. Take it back, I would say, first and foremost. But really, what's really, really important, Mark and everybody else, is that there's got to be a class analysis. We need multiracial and multi-ethnic, multi-gender class solidarity like we have never needed before. The good news is that, you're seeing these weird contradictions. The MAHA movement, I just got off of a call yesterday with the Nebraska Farmers Union. They're anti-data centers more than many of the liberals who live in big cities. And these contradictions, it's reminding me, I'm not aging myself too much, not as much as Howie or you, Mark, anyway. So I feel good about bringing up Jesse Jackson's 1988 campaign, when I was a whippersnapper and you guys were like, seasoned veterans. But that 1980, see how Howie just looked at me? That 1988 Jesse Jackson campaign broke down this mythology of a rural-urban divide. So this is and you saw Marjorie Taylor Greene endorsed one of the two Democrats running for Public Service Commission in Georgia because they were anti-data center. So with these contradictions that have risen, the end of the endangerment finding, Trump taking away the mercury controls for power plants, I think this is actually a great time for a Green New Deal that's rooted in eco-socialism. You don't necessarily have to tell them it's eco-socialism. I'm talking to you today because I don't go into rural Western Nebraska. I don't even talk about climate change, right? I talk about the things, as Nina was saying, I'm having conversations, and then I bring them along to socialism, surely but surely. I start them with Bernie Sanders and Becky Bond before I give them state and revolution. I don't go right for the jugular. But yes, exactly, Brittany, using plain language about people's material conditions. And even material conditions isn't plain language, but people understand that. So multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-gendered is the only way we're going to make it work. And we really have to sort of navigate and circumvent this idea of the neoliberals who want us to be divided because it's more profitable. And yeah, so that's where I would start. Yeah, take back your Green New Deal, Green Party.
Howie, your hand up?
Yeah, I would say if you're working on a local Green New Deal, there's a lot you can learn from Boston and Ithaca. But if you're going to get to 100% renewables and have some power independent of the ebbs and flows of politics and the money behind it, the finance and real estate sectors, public power, owning public ownership, democratic public ownership, so the people are saying what happens, not elites, really gives you the leverage to do all kinds of things on climate action as well as economic justice for people that use power and the gas utility. So I would say if you're thinking about a local Green New Deal, that should be part of your program. The other point I want to make, I'm going to put a link into an article by David Schwartzman, who was a Green. We talked about him earlier. Maybe it was before the broadcast because he died recently. But he, argued strongly against the sort of blanket degrowth position, because if we're going to end poverty in the world, we're going to have about 3.5 kilowatt hours per capita. That's the level at which people in countries with that live a long life. And we have more than that in the developed North. So, that can be shrunk down with more efficiency. But in the global South, they need power. And right now, there's about 16 terawatts worth of power in the world. And if everyone's going to have 3.5 kilowatts per capita, we're going to need 24 terawatts at the current population. So it's more than degrowth. You have to distinguish. We want to degrow the military industrial complex, disappear the fossil fuel industry, but also grow renewables so that people can have a decent life. So anyway, check out David's article. I think it's a good argument. So the link is in the chat.
And just one quick thing that I agree with everything that my brother Howie said, but just like we don't want to romanticize any Green New Deal, as Nina was saying earlier, you don't want to romanticize public power. I live in Nebraska. It's 100% public power. The most environmentally racist. As a matter of fact, we have a new slogan that because of the demographics of our public power board and the way that they treat Black and brown and poor communities, we are saying it's less public power and more white power because that's how bad they are. So Howie hit the nail on the head. Democratic, and real democratic, and not just sprinkling in a public power. I love DSA New York, right? But the public power plan, the build public renewables, because they did not stay pure and staunch, it really is a public-private renewable plan because they're working with private entities. There cannot be private entities in our public power discourse or in our public power machinations. But otherwise, I agree with Howie. Howie and I will talk about it more in Chicago this summer about the right amount of degrowth.
Yeah, I'm happy to have that conversation. Yeah, public power is a necessary but not sufficient condition. Norway has a lot of public power and they use it to extract oil and gas, and not so much invest in renewables, although they've moved somewhat that way. So yeah, you get public control, but then you've got to make the right decisions. And the other thing about Nebraska is they control the distribution, but not generation, as I understand it. So they have not socialized the production of power. They just control the distribution, which is very limited in terms of your leverage.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to leave a little time for each of you to make a closing statement. It's been suggested I make the point that EcoAction is always looking for more members. If you're in a state with the Green Party, we get 3 delegates per state, so you may want to contact them. This is another Anthony question, once again from Mike Feinstein. Your comments were rich with deep interconnected concepts that most of us activists are familiar with, but how do you communicate these profound thoughts to an average voter, like when you ran for the Omaha City Council and otherwise? So I don't know if Anthony's able to deal with us at this point.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
You made a lot of profound statements about interconnections with people. How do you communicate that when you're talking to the average person on the door?
Oh, I mean, well, first it just starts with listening, really speaking with farmers and getting them to get off of industrial agriculture. I mean, I'm watching grown patriarchal men start crying because the situation is so dire. So I won't get into like metabolic rift or anything like that. I'll start with regenerative agriculture and what's healthy soil can do for people's lives, what it can do for their crop yields. But in terms of getting too granular and hitting people with Marx and Lenin, no, that's for like reading clubs. You know what I mean? That's not for speaking to the masses necessarily. And it's not to say that the masses can't grasp it. I mean, one thing that I teach a course called Imperialism and the Socialism of the Global South. We know that people in the Global South have grasped this, right? Castro, Cabral, Lumumba, Sankara, and to some extent now even Traore. But I think it's a cliche, Mark, but meeting people where they're at and just talking about their material conditions and then listening, what's going on, farmers have a lot to say, and if you listen to them and don't go in with sort of like this coastal elite attitude, which they can smell out from a mile away, you'll make a lot of friends. I'm a black dude. I'm a black socialist with dreadlocks from Brooklyn, and I'm staying over at like farmers' houses in Western Nebraska, because we've made real friendships. I'll end by saying this: the great Adrienne Marie Brown, who's the purveyor of emergent strategy, says it's simple: critical connections must come before critical mass. It's that simple.
Nina, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, honestly, I think Anthony said it pretty eloquently. So we'll just be repeating what he says. But I mean, honestly, what seems to resonate, is really connecting with what are the material concerns and material interests of people, and that has been effective here in Boston and in any activism that I have done. And oftentimes it's really not about climate. It is about the economic concerns, or we're doing work on the global pesticides trade at the center right now and talking about the impacts on farmers, farm workers, communities, consumers, and then you back end in some of these climate initiatives to make it whole in that respect, but starting with the material impacts and material concerns of those communities and building out from there so that you have a base of solidarity and you have a base of understanding.
Okay. So we usually end at about 9:15. That's about 5 minutes. If each of our speakers maybe want to give a 2-minute summary, closing statement, we'll do
We
the
do
same
have
thing.
one question if you want to ask
Yes,
for that.
Eleanor.
I'm wondering how we protect Manhattan, New York, and the Bay Area in California from the encroaching ocean's rise.
What do we do?
I think there's
Well,
a
anybody-
there's the easy and then the hard answer. The easy answer, which is I think the short-term answer, which many cities, including New York, are already starting to do, which is the hard and soft armoring of the the ocean, whether that's building up artificial reefs, installing seawalls, doing resiliency along the coast. And these are not particularly the nature forward solutions are not something to denigrate. Particularly, they can work in certain areas, but then there's also the communities that need to think longer and harder about managed retreat and what that means. And this has been a topic that is a political hot potato, but I think that there's a number of cities, Boston included, that needs to start having this conversation a lot more seriously. Insurance companies for sure are thinking about it and managing that risk, and pricing it in for the rest of us. And this comes up in a lot of policy and planning spaces, but not so much in the public discourse. And so it's honestly incumbent upon activists at the local level to start pulling the wool back and having this discussion of what that looks like. There are many examples of what that looks like. Maryland has resilience authorities, and they're starting to raise climate bonds to do vast, like, county level adaptation. So there's a lot we can do. Again, it's a spectrum, but I think managed retreat does need to be part of the conversation on that one.
I would just add to that, Nina's absolutely right. I think we have to get into our heads the idea resilience is not surrender, right? And it's hard because I mean there is an element of righteous anger and indignation that comes with the thought of managed retreat. Like we're being forced to do this for things that aren't even our fault, right? Think about people in like New Orleans where there's cultural aspects to this as well, which is why Nina, I know Nina, we have to be really intentional about it. Can't just throw a term out like managed retreat to Black people in New Orleans unless you have a good pair of running shoes and you don't smoke cigarettes and can run very fast and very long, because there is a term called root shock and this idea of being uprooted, whether it's gentrification or managed retreat. But resilience is not surrender. And some people, are dogmatic. My dear brother, Tom Goldtooth from Indigenous Environmental Network, you know him, Mark. If you say, something like resilience or adaptation, he believes you're talking about false solutions, as how he names climate capture, direct air capture. But it's not the same thing. And it goes to what Nina said. Don't just throw the word out there. Be intentional, to keep the conversation going. Resilience isn't surrender. Resilience actually is going to end up probably being a lifesaver.
Okay, are we ready to go to closing statements? Howie?
Sure, I'll say a few more words about how we can rebuild this movement for a Green New Deal. We've talked about, local possibilities. I would add we can get things done at the state level. In New York State, Anthony mentioned the Build Public Renewables Act of 2023, which the DSA public, what do they call themselves? The Public Power Coalition is touting as a great victory, but it's lemon socialism. The New York Power Authority only gets to build at a site if private industry rejects it. So it means, it's harder to make money and pay your costs there. And there was a companion bill, the New York Utility Democracy Act, which would have municipalized all of New York's private utilities within 2 years and created democratically elected utility boards to oversee their operations. It didn't even get a vote. So we, Anthony's been quoting Cabral. One of the things Amilcar Cabral said was, tell no lies, claim no easy victories. We can't tell the people we're winning when we're getting our ass kicked. So there's more to do at the state level. And I would say federally, Greens should tell their, if you're running candidates, make it one of your issues. Or if you're not running candidates, at least make it an issue in the election, to get this endangerment clause, which is Lee Zeldin, who was a gubernatorial candidate here in New York, now the EPA director, got rescinded. And that was a clause that allowed EPA to regulate greenhouse gas emissions by vehicles, power plants, and other sources because it found that under the Clean Air Act, greenhouse gases were harming public health and the environment. So the Trump administration rescinded it. We can get it back by having Congress pass a law. I think that's a Green New Deal, or at least climate action, that we can campaign on this year with the midterms.
Ina?
Yeah, thank you. There's so much in this webinar. I'm glad it's recorded. I'm going to go and listen to it again myself. Yeah, I mean, just, a final thought on all of this, and it's kind of a guiding principle for our work in many ways, a direction for our center, and that is, we realize that to take on some of the most powerful corporations in the world, we have to have a multi-class, a multiracial, multi-generational, and international climate justice movement, and honestly, a movement of movements. A lot of our work now is actually at the intersection of democracy and climate, because without a functioning democracy, climate is going to be a lot harder to get done. And so, as part of that, in a transformative Green New Deal politics is predicated on some of the principles that I had listed, whether that's, social ownership, democratic and participatory governance. But all of that, I think, feels very big at times, and we can bring it back down to one of the nuggets that I'm taking away, and has been true, sort of a truism in our work too, and that is just start by having real conversations, material conversations with your friends, allies, old and new. Go to some new spaces and see what is resonating, within that community and what you can build upon. And I think that if we have enough of that, we can start to really build this momentum that is necessary to build around a vision for the future that we want. Because a lot of these policies and ideas are actually extremely popular if you poll them. So I think there's a really good base, and it's just about, finding friends that are there. They just don't know yet.
Yeah, Howie, extracted the Cabral quote that I was going to use. You got to watch Howie; he's slippery, like that. But I everything that these two amazing comrades said. First, I'll say what Nina said is that all the issues that we believe in and that we are fighting for are popular. We have to confront the Democrat Party. And if they won't listen to us this time, this is a midterm election that should be an electoral layup. And somehow they are finding ways to turn it into a half-court buzzer-beating shot that they're going to miss, right? Like the Democrats don't have any Jalen Brunsons or OG Ananovis. I missed my next, and so we have to fight like hell for that. That goes beyond like no kings and getting uncomfortable and stepping to them and saying, you lost on genocide. You chose genocide over winning elections. Don't do that again, because our lives are on the line. But also, I would say that it is time, I think, for a third party uprising. Y'all, Green Party, my frustration with y'all right now, and I'm going to end with this. There is a tailor-made candidate for you, and we're not hearing enough about him. We should all be sending money to this brother in North Carolina. I didn't know he was a Green Party candidate. This is a national story. The brother who got his hand broken for standing up to genocide and being anti-imperialist. He has been more environmental by being anti-imperialist than NRDC and Sierra Club and EDF and these horrible organizations that we also have to get comfortable confronting. So just like Nina said, if there's no democracy, there can't be a Green New Deal. If there's unlimited war and ecocide and genocide, it's going to make it that much harder, because fossil fuels fuel imperialism, and imperialism is fueling the climate crisis. So I would say that the Green Party is a party of peace, a party of anti-war. Now let's embrace anti-imperialism, and for God's sake, let's do whatever we can for that brother. I'm sorry, Howie and Mark, I'm forgetting the cat's name in North Carolina who got his hand broken.
Brian McGinnis.
Brian McGinnis, guys, like this is I'm going to talk a little SHIT right now. That's your guy, not Butch Ware. I don't know what's going on in California, but this is your guy. And to have an anti-imperialist veteran of the military and putting a Green New Deal spin on that, that can go a long way. And I'll also say, like Nina and Howie and Mark, who are white comrades who I love and trust, get uncomfortable speaking to people, assholes like me. You will still pick something up at the end of the day. Mark and I have had debates. Howie and I have had debates. Nina and I kind of agree on everything. But have these principled debates, because that's also a big part of principled struggle. And it's amazing to be with you. Thank you again, Mark, for the invitation. I'm going to have to sleep on a different bed tonight because it's been too late and my pregnant partner is already sending messages saying, "Are you still talking to those crazy eco-socialists?" I am, baby. I'm sorry. And yeah.
Okay. And so I'm going to give the last word to Maureen Doyle, who's secretary at the EcoAction, and she's going to cover everything I forgot to mention.
Oh, I thought you all three of you gave great presentations, and yes, as Anthony said, I'm gonna have to watch it too because I'm gonna or Nina, I don't know who said it, but I'm gonna have to watch it again. There was too much. But it was great. um and there was some stuff in the chat about joining things like National Committee, EcoAction. I embrace them all. So I put my email in the chat. You can contact Mark, Eliza. We'd be happy to help you out with that.
Okay. We will be posting this to our YouTube channel. We'll send out an email. We'll try to include the slideshows with it. And next month, on the second Monday, we'll probably be doing one on Earth Day to May Day. And so a little bit more in the Green New Deal, but also some of the related issues like immigrant rights and workers' rights. And thank you very much to all our speakers for taking the time, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.